Almost, I just might take it off. Would you agree that there are times when everything seems to go right in life? And then there are other times when everything seems out of sync? Nothing seems to go right. You know, some call it coincidence. Some call it pure luck. Others say that someone is working behind the scenes, working out our destiny. You know what? I agree with that last group that believes that there's someone behind the scenes working things out, and I believe that someone is God. We call it coincidence and happenstance. We have all kinds of words for that, and good fortune, good luck, destiny, fate. You know, we have all kinds of words that we put in that. But I believe that God is there working all things out, even the things that don't seem to be the right things at the time. As I was saying in the prayer, even though we go through those dry seasons and we're not seeing the rain on the horizon, and we wonder how God could be in the midst of that, He is, and He will bring you through. We're looking at Esther today, Queen Esther. And it's a very unique book in many, many ways. I want to share with you some of them. For one, it's one of only 2 books in the Bible named after a woman. What's the other one? Ruth. Yes, that's the other one. It's also one of 2 books that doesn't mention God at all. The name of God is not mentioned in the book at all. Anybody know what that other book is? Jonathan, it's my favorite book. Yeah. No, oh, that, yeah. Song of Songs, yeah. He nailed me one Sunday morning on Sunday school with saying, I'm going to have Song of Songs for you to do in Sunday school today. Oh, no. But that's the other one, written by Solomon. Song of Songs is the only other one that does not mention God at all. Now, just because the book of Esther doesn't use the name of God in it doesn't mean that you don't see God's handiwork throughout. I think as we go through Esther, you will see God's handiwork throughout. It isn't all just chance and happenstance and coincidence and all that other words that we want to use for that. We will see God's handiwork. God is in the midst of it all. I think it's quite clear as we read through the story that He is right there in the midst. Luck, coincidence, good fortune, or chance is the way we describe so many times the favorable events that happen to us. And we've seen that happen quite often in the story. But I believe it's the hand of God fulfilling His upper story. It isn't coincidence. It isn't happenstance. It isn't just something that just, they were so lucky. We look at that and say that so often. Was it just good fortune that allowed Joseph to rise from a prisoner to second in command of all Egypt? I don't believe that. I don't believe that was just good fortune on his part. Was it just coincidence that a supernatural wind blew across Egypt and separated the waters from the Red Sea so that the children of Israel could cross over on dry land? I don't believe that was a coincidence. I don't believe that supernatural thing happened just, it just happened at just the right time. No, I don't believe that. I believe God was doing just that. And is it just happenstance that when they got completely across and Pharaoh's army is coming after it, that's when the wind died down? How lucky is that? And then the wind just went all over and destroyed Pharaoh's army. How lucky can you get? Yeah. Was it pure luck that a young shepherd boy was able to take a sling and a stone and defeat a giant, hitting him right in the right spot that caused him to fall down so that he could go and chop his head off with his own sword? Was that just a lucky throw? Just a lucky coincidence? No, I don't believe that. Was it pure chance that the Assyrians were conquered by the Babylonians, who were in turn conquered by the Persians, who just happened to believe in returning people to their homelands? That was their philosophy. No, the others wanted to transport you and deport you into their country, but we want you to go back to your own homelands. God had prophesied that would happen. That's not happenstance. That isn't coincidence. And was it purely coincidental that the name of the king who happened to be prophesied that would do this over 100 years before. And oh, by the way, and it happened exactly at the right time that the prophet said it would happen. Was that just coincidence? It was prophesied. We can't possibly think it was coincidence. And we can't think of that many of the things that happen to us are pure coincidence. This perception of chance appears quite often in Esther as we look at that. Just by chance, Queen Vashti decided at that moment to assert herself and defy the king who wanted her to come into the banquet that he was holding right then so that he could show off her beauty. And just by chance, of all the times he's probably done that before, this happened to be the one time she decided she wasn't going to do it. And then got deposed as the queen. And just by chance, a beautiful Jewish girl happened to be the one chosen by the king to be the next queen of Persia. How lucky can she be? How lucky. That is, she was chosen after a 12-month spa treatment that most women would die for. If you read that in Esther, 12 months of pampering. Now, other than the circumstances around that, perhaps, but not too many women would pass up a 12-month spa treatment. By chance, Mordecai just happened to find out about a plot to assassinate Xerxes. King Xerxes. And he happened to prevent it by telling those about this plot. Just by chance, he happened to do that. Now, the next chance circumstance takes a little more explanation. It just so happens that a man named Haman, who was an important royal official, and he had developed an intense hatred for the Jews, and Mordecai in particular. It seems Mordecai would not bow down to Haman whenever he paraded through the streets of Susa. He was a royal official, and he was supposed to bow down to this royal official, but he would not bow down to him. Does that sound a little bit familiar? Is that reminiscent of a situation in Daniel? Very much like that? It seems that Mordecai would not bow down like that. And so Esther 3:2 states this: all the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman. For the king had commanded this concerning him, but Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Again, we saw that in the book of Daniel with the 3 Hebrew teenagers who refused to bow down to the golden idol. They would only bow down to Jehovah God. And Mordecai felt the same way. So Haman decides he's going to teach Mordecai a lesson. And he decides, I'm not only going to wipe out Mordecai, I'm going to wipe out every one of the Jews. Because he hated the Jews. Seems like that's been a theme throughout history, doesn't it? The Jews have had a really hard time throughout history with a lot of hatred towards them. Haman's just another example of it. So Haman convinces King Xerxes to sign a decree that on a certain day, all the Jews in all 127 provinces would be killed. And further, anyone killing a Jew would be allowed to keep the personal possessions of that deceased Jew. So that's giving them even an incentive. Don't just kill them, you can take all of their property too. Sounds like a good deal, doesn't it? For a lot of people who have no conscience and don't think about those things. I mean, that's the king's decree. I can do it. I got free license to do that. So to determine the exact day when the Jews would be exterminated, Haman casts dice, casts lots. That's all lots are, is really just casting dice. And the dice in Hebrew is called pur, or Purim. That's going to come in later. Really important. And the dice came up Adar the 13th, which is close to March 10th on our calendar. That became the day when all the Jews would be wiped out. When everyone would have permission to kill every Jew in every province of all of Persia and take their possessions and property. As chance would have it, the date was 11 months in the future. You know, a lot can change in 11 months. A lot can change in 11 months. It really can. So Mordecai encourages Esther, you've got to appeal to Xerxes to stop this genocide of the Jews. Now, you got to understand that Mordecai, who was Esther's cousin, had told Esther, do not reveal that you are Jewish. Don't reveal it. So evidently there was some animosity towards the Jews that was going on at that time amongst the peoples. And so he wanted her to hide that. And so the king did not know that she was Jewish. And so he tells them, you've got to go. You've got to make an appeal. But the thing is, her going before the king could actually end Esther's very life. You just didn't do that. You just didn't at that time, you just didn't show up and say, King, I want to talk to you. Esther 4:11 states this, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that he be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the gold scepter to him and spare his life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. So it was a chance that she was taking. It really was. It was a life or death decision. It was a life or death chance. She could appear before the court without being summoned, but then it depended on whether he would extend the gold scepter to her or not. And if he didn't, that meant death. Mordecai states that she should not expect to escape this decree simply because she's in the palace, and to remember that all her family will be killed if she doesn't try. Her whole family and perhaps her herself, that the secret will come out, that she'll be found out to be a Jew, and she'll be killed as well. So he concludes his appeal with these words that we are kind of familiar with in Esther 4:14. Who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this? Have you heard that phrase? For such a time as this? That comes from Esther. So Esther sends this reply with what she wants Mordecai to do before she will attempt such a dangerous thing. And we find that in Esther 4:16. She writes this, go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. What courage that took to do that. What courage to stand up in the face of very much a potential death sentence. But that shows the faith and courage of Esther with those words. Again, the name of God is not used, but who do you think they were fasting to? It was fasting to God. That's who they were fasting to. You don't just fast for no reason. You just don't decide to not eat for 3 days. I don't do that, obviously. But, you just don't do that for no reason. You do it because you're fasting to God. So she does. She approaches Xerxes, and he's glad to see her. He receives her, and she's taken the chance, and it has paid off. See how chance is played throughout all of this? She took the chance, and it paid off. Esther simply asked the king and Haman, because he asked her, what do you want? Because she was there, obviously, for a reason, and he asked, what do you want? And she simply asked the king and Haman to come to a banquet that she was preparing. She planned to reveal this evil plot of Haman's at the banquet. So she says, I just want to have a banquet that I want to plan for you, king, and for Haman. Well, Haman walks off there just all puffed up. I'm going to go to a private banquet with the king and the queen with me. I'm the only other invited guest. He's going away just thinking he's all it. If he only knew. If he only knew what was planned. Well, it just so happened, by chance, of course, that the king couldn't sleep that night. You see how the chance just seems to happen all the way through this? The king couldn't sleep that night. And so he decided to call in the royal record to come and read through the royal record. I guess he thought that would put him to sleep, reading through his royal record. But he comes across this part that talks about the fact that Mordecai had decided to reveal this plot to assassinate him. And he discovers that he had never done anything to reward Mordecai, for what he had done. And so he is thinking about that. And so Haman, when he returns the next morning and comes into the court, and the king asks him, Haman, what do you think I should do for someone that pleases me that I want to honor? Well, think about it from Haman's perspective. He'd just been asked to a private banquet with Xerxes, Queen Esther, and himself. He's thinking, it's got to be me. It's got to be me that he wants to honor. So he comes up with this elaborate plan of what should happen. And so in Esther chapter 6, verses 7 through 10, it says this. So he answered, talking about Haman, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Go at once, the king commanded. Get the robe, the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. Well, obviously, Haman's devastated. This is not what he wanted at all. Mordecai's the one he wanted to kill, and now he's got to go and honor him. I liked what was said in Sunday school, that Haman was Mordecai'd. Mordecai'd. Yeah. But he had built that very morning before he came, and God asked this by the king, that very morning he had built a 75-foot high gallows and was planning to come and ask the king to hang Mordecai on it. Now, some versions say gallows, some versions say a pole, because they were good at that time. It's not very nice, but that was what they did. And hanging's not nice either, but sometimes they would actually impale a person on a pole. And so it could be interpreted either way. So he was either going to hang him on a gallows or he was going to impale him on this 75-foot high pole. But instead, by chance, he's told he has to honor the very person that he hates the most and wanted to hang that very day. What a twist of fate. What a happenstance. What a piece of good luck. Yeah. But the worst is yet to come. At the banquet that evening, Esther asks for her life and the life of her people to be spared. So now she's revealing that she is a Jew. And this decree that all the Jews would be killed is going to end the life of her family, of herself, and of all her people. And he asks for her life. When the king is confused at first when she asks for her life, she explains Haman's plot to kill the Jews that will end everyone. So Haman is exposed, and that very day he's executed on the very same gallows that he'd built for Mordecai. Twist of fate. Yeah. The problem still remained as to what to do with the decree that was sent out declaring a day when everyone could kill all the Jews. You see, once a decree was written by a king and his signet ring or whatever, he sealed it, it could not be changed. That decree was out there and it could not be changed. So there's a decree that on a certain day, all the Jews can be killed. So they still had to deal with that. So he allows Esther and Mordecai to draft an additional decree that the Jews can defend themselves that day. They don't have to just sit idly by and be killed. They can defend themselves. The decree goes out and there's a great celebration amongst the Jews. Can you imagine? They had just had a death sentence lifted off of them to where they could at least defend themselves. Great joy, great celebration. In fact, the Jewish nation grew as a result of this second decree. You may ask, how in the world did that happen? How did the Jewish nation grow as a result of that decree? Well, it's just a little thing that you can pick up on Esther 8:17. Esther 8:17. In every province and in every city, wherever the edict of the king went, there was joy and gladness among the Jews with fasting and celebration. And many people of other nationalities became Jews. All of a sudden, becoming a Jew was fashionable. Many others became Jews because of fear of the Jews had seized them. Isn't that a little twist there too? All of a sudden, by chance, everybody wants to be Jewish because they can defend themselves. Mordecai then is honored by taking Haman's place as an official in the empire, and is actually given all of Haman's property as well. And beautiful, courageous Esther continues as queen. Not a bad likeness up there, isn't it? That's a beautiful lady that Marilyn created for us. Thank you. It was very nice. So she continues as queen. But this isn't the end of the story either. This event became a great Jewish victory as 75,000 of their enemies were defeated and killed that day throughout the kingdom. 75,000. And this victory then became a 2-day Jewish festival and became known as the Feast of Purim. Or, you might put it in modern terms, the Feast of the Dice. As Purim is the word for dice. It's one of the only 2 festivals that is not prescribed in the Mosaic Law and are from the post-exile period. They were so blessed by this event that they decided we need to celebrate this every year. In fact, they made it a 2-day festival, and they celebrate it every year as the Feast of Purim. Anybody know what the other feast that's not in the Mosaic Law, a festival that the Jews do every year? Hanukkah. That's it. Hanukkah is the other feast that's not in the Mosaic Law, but that they celebrate every year. An interesting side note about this festival is that during the Feast of Purim, they read the entire book of Esther, and they read it like a melodrama. I mean, they really play it up big. And whenever Haman's name is read, everybody in the audience boos and hisses. And every time that Mordecai's name is read, they cheer wildly. Anybody ever been to one of those feasts where that was done? Yeah, several here have done that. I mean, that would be kind of fun, wouldn't it? You hear Mordecai, woo, boo, yeah, you know. You hear Mordecai, yeah, you know. It's almost like reading scriptures about when Satan tempted Jesus, and every time Satan's name comes up, moo, and every time Jesus' name comes out, yay! That's what they did. They celebrated, and as you can see, they still celebrate it today. They still do that. They read the book of Esther, and they celebrate that together, and they do this booing and hissing as they read it through. You know what one of the greatest lessons of this story is? I mean, that's a nice story and all that, but we have to learn how to apply that to ourselves here too. I always want to make sure that we do that as well as not only be familiar with the story, but how does it apply to my life? And I think one of the greatest lessons is for the Jewish people, first, when all the exiles didn't return to Judah, God was still looking after them. You see, this was happening in Persia. This was happening in the city center of Susa. But many had already left, as we learned last week. 50,000 had already left to go back to Judah, to Jerusalem. But the edict was for all the provinces, which included Judah. But we need to understand that God is constantly looking out for his people. He could have just protected the people in Judah from this edict, as he had done in Egypt. When all the plagues only happened to the Egyptians, it didn't happen to the Judeans. But he didn't do that. Throughout all 127 provinces, wherever the Jews were, he was looking out for them. He still cares about them. He still loved them and cared about them. He didn't abandon them, even though they had somewhat abandoned him, because they had been given the edict that Jesus had prophesied earlier, that they could leave and go back to the promised land. And they didn't do it. Many of them stayed right where they were. They decided, well, we've already built our homes, we've built our businesses here, we've made our relationships and friendships. We want to just stay where we're at rather than go back to God's promised land. So in essence, they sort of abandoned God once again when he'd planned for them to be able to be safe back in Jerusalem. But he still loved them. He still cared for them. He still protected them from their enemies. And God is in control of the roll of the dice. He's in control of all these circumstances that happen. God was in everything that seemed to happen by coincidence. It isn't coincidence. And we know that from Proverbs 16:33 that tells us this. We may throw the dice, but the Lord determines how they fall. God is in control. Even when we may not think so. I mean, this was a pretty dry period in the life of the Jews right then, when for 11 months they had to believe they were about to die from a royal edict from King Xerxes. All of a sudden, they're able to defend themselves. So with God in control, we don't need to be afraid of anything. We just don't. What are your fears this morning, perhaps? Fears of illness, aging, not enough money, I don't have a job, loss of my home, family breakdowns, being alone, wayward children, depression, death. What are your fears this morning? Whatever they are, whatever you're facing right now that's stirring up that kind of anxiety like the Jewish people faced, take courage. Take courage that God is in control. Take courage like Esther and Mordecai, knowing that life may look sometimes just like a roll of the dice, but God is behind the scenes working all things out for our good. Even when we can't see that, even when it just doesn't seem to make sense, how could that possibly be for any good? We don't know what God has planned for the future. We don't know what God is going to do. But when we trust and believe in God, we can trust that he is working all things out for our good. Just as God watched over the Israelites, God promises to watch over his people, the church, today. There are days you may think God's not around, but the story of Esther reminds us that he is. And when you don't feel like he's around, that really is more our issue than an issue of God, because God's always there. We're the one that actually seems to move away from God and feel the distance because of the circumstances that we're in. But he's put you right where you are right now so that you can make a difference. To say the words that someone needs to hear. To be the example someone needs to see. To help someone find freedom from sin. So let others roll the dice, but for us, we'll let God take care of us. We will trust in God. Shall we pray? Our dear Heavenly Father, in those difficult times, when it is hard to trust you, hard to understand your plan, hard to believe that this is for good. Help us, Lord, to trust you more. When we feel distant from you, Lord, come close. Wrap your arms around us. Surround us with your love and your peace. And lead us in the way you'd want us to go. You're in control, God. We will trust you. Help us to trust you more. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.